Trail from Needle Rock by Peter Field. Chapter 1. The cold moonlight washed the roof of Dutch Springs with silver and splashed the hoof-pocked Main Street with shadows. The huddle of frame buildings grouped around the two rows of square-fronted saloons and stores that comprised the business section that lay silent beneath the stars. The canopied pank walls were black canyons, save where oblongs of yellow lamplight slated through the dusty windows of the Golden Eagle. Inside the batwings, Mike, the proprietor, dozed peacefully behind the bar. In one corner, an intent group of townsmen hunched around a poker table. No sound broke into the rising cadence of Mike's snore save the subtle rattle of chips. And then the mantle of quiet that enveloped the sleeping cowtown was rudely rent by the roar of a 6-gun. Again and again it crashed, the echoes of the reports harshly shattering the silence. In his little lean-to shack back behind the courthouse, Pat Stevens, the sheriff of Powder Valley, yawned as his pen scratched over the paper. The gray-eyed sheriff was more at home on a horse than in a swivel chair. He detested desk work, but there were warrants to be signed and requisitions to be made. Pat's system was to allow papers to accumulate until they clustered his spur-scratched desk and then clean up the whole lot in one late-night session. He dropped the pen and reached to his top vest pocket for the makins with a grunt of relief. The roar of drum fire hit his ears. With a bound he was on his feet and reaching for his gun belt. It was hanging on a peg with hat and spurs. Buckling the belt on above his lean hips, he hastened out into the moonlight. As he hit Main Street at a half-run, perplexity furrowed his forehead. Dutch Springs had been quiet as Boot Hill since the Chicago and Rio Grande had abandoned its project to lay steel through the valley. This was midweek. Few punchers and no strangers in town. What the hell was this fracas about? The sheriff's head swiveled as his eyes searched up and down Main Street. Poker players were piling out of the Golden Eagle. Heads protruded cautiously from half-open doors, and lights they winked on like fireflies. Once the gun spoke, beyond the Gold Eagle. In the moonlight, the sheriff sighted a big raw-boned figure beneath a shapeless sombrero, trudging over the ruts, waving a smoking gun. Like a huge dog, a pack jinny, kayaks pulled high and padded behind. Pat stepped into the street, hurried to intercept the gun-toting gent. Glass tinkled as a slug found the window of the Jewel Hotel. "Drop that iron!" shouted the sheriff. "You crazy?"
"Yoo-ee!"
howled the stranger, and another window went out.
"It's Pete Ford!"
yelled a man crouching in the doorway of the Gold Eagle.
"The desert's gone to him. He's plumb gone crazy."
Everybody in Dutch Springs knew Pete, a desert-eroded old prospector who outfitted regularly at the general merchandise store. Pete was shrewd, and a taciturn as most men who lived long alone. He liked his liquor, but never, in the sheriff's memory, had he ever staged a shooting spree. Pat was close now, lead whining over his head. The hammer of the prospector's gun clicked onto empties. "Quit, you dog-blasted old coot!" rapped out the sheriff, grabbing up Pete's gun arm, "or I'll have to jug you."
"I done hit her rich. I found the Mirage. I've got millions, all the gold I can tote, and tons to take out. I can buy up the town, the whole dang valley."
Pete's voice was shrill and stained with excitement. The group crowded the back wings and fell silent. "The Mirage!" ejected one, almost in awe. The prospector drew abreast of the Gold Eagle, straddled a hitch rail, and pushed into the saloon. He was clad in a faded hickory shirt and patch pants, the bottoms of which were thrust into scratched knee boots. Brilliantly bright and blue, his eyes sparkled jubilantly against seamed features tanned darker than an old cowhide by the desert sun. A tangle of beard, flecked with grey, scraggled over his shirt front. He approached the bar with long strides and tossed a handful of rock onto the stained mahogany.
"Set 'em up on me," he boomed, "and that'll pay the score."
Mike hastily pushed his sawed-off shotgun out of sight and hefted a quartz in a great big old paw. The proprietor of the Gold Eagle had prospected plenty in his younger days, and he knew gold. Silently, the poker players bunched around the gaunt desert rat and awaited Mike's verdict. The Mirage mine was legendary, a legend that had lured men into the fastness of the Cobras for a generation. A golden legend accounted for many a pile of whitened bones amid the granite and cactus, a legend which, if the triumphant prospector was not lying, was legend no longer. In 1841, an old-timer pulled into Danville with a gunny sack of quartz. 5% is pay dirt. This assayed out at 85%. A party of 4 men trailed him when he left town. No one ever saw either the old-timer or any of those that trailed him again. 8 years later, in 1849, a weathered old desert rat called Cactus Charlie was found by 2 prospectors by a water hole. He was dying. In the knacks of his burrow, they found samples of ore that was unbelievably rich in gold. Cactus Charlie babbled of a famous mine, but died before he could reveal the location. 15 years passed, and then, in 1864, Frenchie, a breed, packed into Dutch Springs for supplies. He left a load of ore to settle his score. When assayed, this proved to be practically pure gold. Regularly after that, Frenchie towed it in high-grade quartz. Attempts were made to trail him, but Frenchie covered his tracks well when he disappeared into the mountains. One night, he took too much liquor abroad and raved about a mine that held the wealth of the world. At daybreak, sobering, he snuck out of town and never came back. And thus the legend of the Mirage mine was born. 3 men had located it. The silent minds alone knew how many had failed. Every eye focused expectantly on Mike as he examined Pete's sample.
"Ah, mother," muttered the Irishman. "He's speaking the truth."
Mike's head came up.
"A flash in the pan, maybe. Do you have more, though?" "I got 2 gunny sacks on the Jenny," roared Pete, "and 1,000,000 tons back there in the Kimbrellas. It's the Mirage, I tell you, and it's all mine."
Reading doubt in the saloon man's eyes, he swung around and elbowed through the onlookers towards the street. In 2 minutes he banged through the bat wings again, a bulging gunny sack beneath each arm. He dropped one on the sanded floor and dumped the other out onto the bar. Pat pulled out his barrow knife and cut the rope that bound the neck of the sacks on the bar. The men pushed forward eagerly as he spilled the contents. The pile of quartz glinted yellow in the light of the oil lamp swinging overhead, and Mike picked up a piece at random.
"By God, the lost Mirage mine is found!" he yelled.
The Gold Eagle never closed its door that night, until the grey light of dawn flickered through the fly-specked windows and rimmed the smoky oil lamps. Men, hastily dressed and wide-eyed, thronged the saloon, fingering the pile of ore, and gathered respectfully around Pete Ford and bellied up to the bar to discuss the great discovery. Pete was glorious and satisfiedly drunk. Big Frame sprawled into a chair with empty bottles and an ever-full glass on the card table before him. He eyed the yammering crowd with a befuddled grin. His voice had long since been strained to a hoarse croak, but there was still shrewdness in his fading blue eyes and sense in his bemused brain. Through the hours he decanted endlessly upon the riches of his strike, but when his auditors, more or less subtly, endeavoured to gain a hinting at its location, Pete closed up tighter than a clam. The sheriff dropped into the saloon again after midnight and pulled up a chair beside the sack-limbed prospector. "See here, Pete, you're taking too much abroad. Pretty soon your tongue will loosen and you'll say too much. Or maybe that red eye will drive the location of the mine out of your bean. You better lay off and get some shut-eye." The prospector sloshed some more bourbon into his glass and grinned owlishly. "Ain't nothing gonna loosen my tongue. It's all in here." With drunken gravity, he tapped the side of his stained Stetson and pushed rakishly to the back of his head. "Well," Pat said, pushing back his chair, "it's your funeral. You'll find your ginnies over at the livery stable." Washing down a stack of syrup-soaked flapjacks with black coffee, Pat slid off a stool at the Chinese restaurant the next morning. Lighting up, he strolled down to the livery stable. Pete's Jenny was still in the corral. He headed for the Gold Eagle. The chairs were upended on the tables, and Mike, blurry-eyed, was swamping out. By a side wall, Pete Ford lay outstretched upon the sandy floor, deep in a drunken stupor. Pat nodded towards the sleeping form. "Did that doggone lunkhead spill the beans?" Mike shook his head regretfully as he gathered the spittoons. "Not one word." "I gamble half of Dutch Springs trails that jigger when he hits for the trails." The saloon keeper displayed white teeth and a broad grin. "And I'll be one of 'em, Pat, were it not for this saloon." With the remaining sack of ore tied across his ginny, the rediscoverer of the lost mine of Mirage pulled out of town with the setting sun. Pat was sober now, his seamed features twisted in a grin as his eyes ran down the scattering of ponies, the bedrolls that were spooled behind the cantles, flicking flies at the hitching rail. "Don't none of you jaspers get notions of dogging me. I got a date to liquor up there into Dansville. And them, some bitches been harsing me for 23 years. Claimed I was loco and hunting the Mirage. I sure would crave to make 'em eat dirt." With that, he hit the wagon road that wound southward. A tall, unkempt man trudging through the hovering dust, the patient burro plodding along at his heels, one of the legend who had sold his soul to the solitude, and one of the few who had been paid for his price. In the torrid heat of noon, 3 men lounged on the bench that fronted the Jewel Hotel. Pat Stevens, vest hanging loose, sat in the center. On his right side sprawled the huge figure of Ezra, a spurred, red-headed giant in grey shirt and denims. One eye was closed, the lid laying flat. The wound that had taken the eye showed pale and white against his bronzed features, slanting up diagonally across the eyelid and over his temple into the hair. Sam, the third, was short and thick around the shoulders. Bright darting eyes were deep bedded above a crowned nose. a blue-black beard of stubble, prickled his aggravating chin. Neither was a looker of beauty, but Pat could say that better men never sighted a partner. The trio had cleaned rattlesnakes aplenty out of the Powder Valley. Lazily, the sheriff's gray eyes ran over the high-fronted stores with their peeling paint, the deserted planks, and the handfuls of ponies that were drooping at the hitch rails. Mentally, he compared the scene of that 6 months before, when Chicago and Rio Grande steel snaked through the valley, and the construction hands held high carnival night and day. Well, he thought, half regrettably, that flash of fire had quickly burned out. Now Dutch Springs had slumped back into its old-time drowsiness. A sheriff might just as well be put out for grass, for all the work he had to do. His biggest job in a month had been jugging a drunk. Idly, he watched a rider jogging up Main Street on a weary pony, tailed by a drifting dust plume.
"That ain't no puncher,"
declared Sam, bright eyes following the sheriff's gaze.
"He sets the saddle like a sodge style. Must give his spine hell of a long trail."
"Maybe he don't crave to dance all around like a monkey on the back like a certain runt here does," rumbled Ezra.
"At least my horse ain't swayed back from packing a ton of hog fat around," snorted Sam.
"You hombres have to always be on the prod?" inquired Pat pleadingly as he loosened his shirt front and slid lower in the seat. The rider reined towards the rail in front of the Gold Eagle and spoke to a puncher that was hunkering against a post. Pat saw the waddy suddenly galvanize into action. Unwinding like spring steel, he ducked beneath the rail and dodged under the pony's drooping head and angled across the street towards the hotel at a run.
"Say, Pat," he yelled hoarsely, "Pete Ford's been bushwhacked. That hombre found him, stiff as a poker, on the trail."
End of chapter 1.